Basically, the Molinist view takes God's knowledge and defines it in three ways, as natural knowledge, middle knowledge, and free knowledge. The reason why middle knowledge is called middle knowledge, and the word middle comes from, is because it's right in the middle of natural knowledge and free knowledge in the logical sequence. Okay, so you see God's natural knowledge, what is meant by that is God knows everything that could happen. God knows all possibilities. So prior to creation, without having created anything, God knows all possibilities of what he could create. And then the second moment, or second logical moment, God's middle knowledge, God knows everything that would happen based on what he would create. So God knows which possibilities are feasible. So he knows which worlds, all of the worlds that he could create, and then based on conditions in those worlds, what would happen and throughout history. And then out of all the worlds that God could create, God actualizes one of them, which you are currently living in. And then that world being actualized, we go to free knowledge, and that is that God knows everything that will happen. God exhaustively knows all things. So God knows everything that is going to happen and will happen because he actualized a particular world based on what he could make and what would happen based on certain conditions in that world. So again, real quick, God knew all the worlds that he could create. He knew what would happen in each one. He picked one and knows what will happen in the one that which he picked, which is the one you're living in. Now, the big question, of course, would be, does the Bible support any of this? And let's take a look at that. It's very difficult to show in the Bible that God knows all possibilities, because nowhere in the Bible does God list out all exhaustive, an exhaustive list of possibilities. So the all part has to be kind of assumed based on who we're talking about here, that being God, being omniscient. He must know all possibilities if he knows some possibilities. So I have two examples of here, and there's many more that can be shown in the Bible, of God knowing some possibilities. And I'll leave it up to you to pause the video and to read here. If you want to read or just look up both scriptures yourself. And you'll see that God knows some possibilities, therefore it should be assumed that he knows all possibilities. Alright, so the next one would be middle knowledge. And does the Bible demonstrate middle knowledge? The answer is yes, and it does quite a bit. And these are just some of the examples of middle knowledge in action. Matthew 11:21-23 is an excellent example. I really like Romans 9:29 because it's right in the middle of the Calvinist most coveted piece of scripture, Romans 9. And middle knowledge is usually demonstrated in if-then type statements, which are normally called counterfactual statements because they counter what factually happened. For example, you could say if Adam and Eve had never eaten of the fruit, then they would still be in the garden. And that would be a counterfactual statement. That does seem to have some truth to it, obviously. And you actually use middle knowledge throughout your life all the time. So, like, say, for example, you're late for work, then you start thinking about everything, all the events that just occurred, and you say, well, if this, then that, if this, then that, and that's middle knowledge. If you had made it to the oven on time, then you would not have burnt your brownies or whatever, that kind of stuff. So middle knowledge is actually quite common throughout all of our lives. And of course, the last one is free knowledge. God knows everything that will happen, and that should be obvious. I shouldn't even have to show any scripture because what is the Bible if it is not a series of books that demonstrate prophecy? So it's quite obvious that God knows what will happen. So God knows all that could happen, all that would happen based on certain conditions, and all that will happen. You see, on the Molinist view, God created a very particular world. And in that particular world at which God actualized, and you're living in, is a world in which certain persons do obey God's command freely, and certain persons don't. God could have actualized a world in which other persons obey his command and other persons don't. So persons who find themselves obeying God's command are doing so because God actualized a world in which they do. God could have actualized a world in which they don't. So God was and is completely in control of the world that we are actually in.